This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Go on to the final paper in this panel. Is Federica here? Okay. So we will have this paper and then we'll have a short break after the paper and go into the discussion with Mark. So Federica Morelli is Associate Professor of History at the University of Turin. She took her PhD in Latin American history at the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Study in Pisa, and she's got several books which include Territorio, Nazione, Riforma e Distribuzione dello Spazio Imperiale in Ecuador, 1765 to 1830, and that was published in 2007. And her latest book is La indipendenza dell'America Spagnola dalla crisi della monarchia alle nuove repubbliche, which I think is, you can understand that one. So her talk today is Denationalizing the End of Empire. Thank you very much, Federica.
Thank you, Catherine. I would like to thank you, Mark, for the invitation and for having involved me in this interesting discussion about decolonization. I also want to apologize for my English that unfortunately lacked some practice in these last years. But I hope you can follow in my reasoning. So I said yes, I already said yesterday in the roundtable that Mark organized the Alliance to the seminar. Major efforts have been undertaken by historians in these 2-3 last decades to understand 19th century Latin America. Concerning the independence period, one of the great achievements of historiography has been to disjoin the political changes and the conflicts from the classical narrative on nationalism, as Francisco said this morning. The 19th century Latin American nations were the result of the collapse of the monarchy, rather than the consequence of the existence of national ambitions liberated from the oppressor. 19th century Latin America has generally been considered by historiography as a failed process in building viable national states. Civil conflicts, caudillos, anarchy were considered the evident elements of this failure. The main cause of this failure was ascribed to colonial legacy. On the contrary, this paper argues that without the deforming lens of this discourse of nation building, the 19th century Latin American decolonization could have been acknowledged in a different way as a transformative and creative operation of modernity by colonized societies. I do not intend here the concept of a nation in broad terms like James Sanders does, but in more strict terms, that is the ability for a state to control its territory, its people, to exercise effectively its sovereignty, and to define its population as culturally homogeneous. So the paper proposed that maybe the concept of the decolonization is more appropriate than that of the nationhood to conceive this period of transition from a colonial society to a republican one. The idea of the nation-building process The idea of the failure of the nation-building process because of colonial legacy has in fact obscured the transformations occurred during the crisis of the empire and the first decades following the separation from European metropolis. This question will be addressed exploring the perception of Latin American independence, particularly in the Italian peninsula. And then I will conclude on some, in the second part of the paper, I will conclude on some remarks about citizenship as one of the most appropriate issues to address the question of decolonization. The Italian particular point of view will offer the possibility, us the possibility to demonstrate the emergence in Europe of the idea of the Spanish legacy as an obstacle to the modernity. We will discover that Latin America was never perceived as the avant-garde, to evoking Davies of democracy, as Latin Americans consider themselves. And so we will see which are the elements that prevented the spreading of this idea about Latin American political superiority in Europe, and particularly in Italy. The attention that the Italian political debate addressed to Iberian American decolonization was quite limited when compared to other European countries. If we look at 19th century press and historical works, we realize that the information on the independence wars and their aftermath was insufficient and quite incoherent. The reason for this defect can be multiple. Difficulty in getting news, censorship, dependence from foreign press. However, they cannot fully explain the lack of intellectual echo of Latin American decolonization in a country which was precisely fighting to liberate its territory from a foreign occupation. Maurizio Isabella's work on political activists who left Italy after the collapse of the Napoleonic regimes in 1814 and the suppression of liberal political movements in 1820-1821 has shown that the cross-cultural exchanges and writings of these intellectuals contributed to the emergence of 19th century Italian Risorgimento nationalism. Yet, although Isabella illustrates the intellectual vitality of the mostly forgotten liberals who scattered across Europe and the Americans during the 20s, in my opinion, it fails to explain how their American experience influenced concretely the Risorgimento debate on the meaning of modern Italian nationalism. The reasons that explain this inadequate interest of the Italian Risorgimento toward Latin American decolonization, in my opinion, are essentially two. One historical and the other historiography. Regarding the latter, Italian historiography has mostly focused on the presence of Italian political activists, above all Garibaldi, in the Americas rather than in the influence of Latin American independence on Italian political culture. However, none of this research has studied how the experience of these Italian political and military activists has influenced, in return, the 19th century Italian culture. Only the work by Lucy Rayel has partially pointed out the importance of Garibaldi's experiences in South America for his own personal and political development. The historical element, the other element at the basis of this inadequate interest of Italian Risorgimento for Latin American decolonization concerned the anti-Spanish sentiment, considered as one of the main components of Italian identity formation during the 19th century. The anti-Spanish attitude has been intensively studied by Italian historiography, yet rarely it has been connected to Latin American independence. Still, the majority of the opinion on Latin American independence are clearly affected by the same negative idea on Spanish domination. Many intellectuals consider the Spanish occupation of the Italian territories the main cause of political, cultural, and economic decadence of the peninsula from the 16th century. Hence, the difficulties to form viable states. In 19th century, intellectuals like Sismondi, Botta, and Balbo integrated the theme of decadence into an historical and political narration which for a long time has influenced the Italian historiography. Thus, from the first decade of the 19th century on, anti-Spanishness became not only an emotional trait of national identity, but also an analytic category that explained the Italian past as a struggle between tyranny and liberty, individual consciousness, and arbitrary power. So, in Italy, as in other 19th century European countries, the myth of the Spanish Black Legend affected the way Latin American decolonization was perceived. The negative judgment on the process was not in fact exclusively Italian, even though in Italy such judgment, echoing similar evaluation on the peninsula's southern questions, were more embedded than in other European countries. They actually had a more continental origin, dating back to the end of the 18th century with the so-called dispute of the New World, reconstructed by Antonello Gelli in his well-known book. This dispute shaped the image of a Latin American society historically blocked and formed by its links with the Catholic monarchy. Following this narration, the Spanish conquest and domination had precluded the continent to progress autonomously after the independence. So the Italian perspective allows us to underline the negative role not only of colonization, but of Spain and its Catholicism for the formation of national states. And this negative role was not only referred to Latin America, but also to Italy, and as I would say, to Spain itself. After the Spanish-American War, the 1898 Spanish generation interrogated extensively the modernity of the Iberian Peninsula. All these analogies suggest that the language of backwardness and underdevelopment that characterized 20th century Latin America did not originate after the Second World War, but was rather a consequence of the ideology that considered Spanishness and Catholicism inadequate for both political and economical development. Whereas in the 19th century, the language of backwardness was elaborated in political terms and was referred essentially to nation building. During the 20th century, it was rather expressed in economic terms, the dependency theory. However, both had common origins dating back to the end of the 18th century and coming from Europe in spite of their anti-European views. So, the attention that the Italian political debate addressed to Iberian American decolonization is very important to understand the origin of this idea about the backwardness. image of a continent whose historical development was brought by an original event, the conquest, was elaborated in Europe almost 2 centuries before, one of the main problems still consists in explaining its adoption by Latin Americans rather than the validity of its assertions. When did Latin America begin to consider themselves inadequate to modernity? How and why did they accept and incorporate this European judgment on their historical specificity? It's very difficult to answer this question, and I think historians should advance in this issue. And probably it was a long process that began at a certain point in the course of the 19th century. However, the independence wars and the years following the political emancipation from Spain were perceived differently, as Davies pointed out, by Latin Americans. Their future was one full of hopes and good intentions. If we do not consider Latin American decolonization as an endogenous process, the maturation of a strong anti-colonial and national consciousness, but a period in which, as a consequence of an unforeseen event, the monarchical crisis, alternative territorial and constitutional projects were elaborated, the notion of colonial inheritance should be reconsidered. It need not impair the formation of new republican states. Rather, this period permitted the articulation between all the new practices that produce new political syncretism. Because of the pervasiveness of national discourse, this kind of syncretism or creative adoption has generally been considered the persistence of colonial practices and institutions rather than the entanglement of the latter with modern practice and institutions. The classical narrative on nationalism that Latin American political leaders and intellectuals use from the 30s, 40s, 1840s to justify the emergence of the new states has thus erased the decolonizing and modernizing efforts that had taken place during the monarchical crisis and the first decades following the independence from Spain. While 19th century Latin American intellectuals who shared the negative vision on the effects of the colonial legacy did not repudiate the revolutionary character of independence movements, they recognize, in fact, that the Libertadores' genuine principle had been betrayed by caudillos. Those who mirrored this vision in the 20th century denied the subversive nature of political independence and warfare, identifying overlooked continuities between colonial rule and the post-colonial regimes that supplanted them. The break from the past, they contended, was not so abrupt and decisive. Archaic structure proved durable, and in politics, economics, the old order did not give full away to a new one. However, in my opinion, it's possible to identify political, social, and economic change during the long revolutionary period in Spanish America. Researchers who have explored Spanish American context within an age of a revolution paradigm identify the popular origins of most of that which was revolutionary in this period. Maritza Lasso's book on the political engagement of black communities in Cartagena, the Indias, and Jamie Sanders' research into Afro-Colombian and mestizo political culture in the Cauca region both show the wide political participation of subaltern groups. Instead of considering them passive actors of modernization, or sectors pursuing alternative goals different from those of the elites, various researchers have pointed out the large media participation in liberal elections, as well as their ability to interpret liberalism as a means to defend their land and communities. Not only subaltern sectors did participate in wars and conflicts, but they engaged in and influenced the political debates about citizenship, republicanism, and democracy, sometimes pushing the elite to activist radical measures they had not initially contemplated. One, as I said at the beginning, one of the most important domains that has shown the strong participation of popular sectors in elaborating and appropriating the political models is the domain of citizenship studies. The recent researches on Spanish-American independence have demonstrated that during the revolutionary period, new models of political and social integration transformed radically the colonial order. Categories which during the colonial period were excluded from certain privileges and rights, such as Indians and free blacks, reached the same legal status than whites. Many constitutional documents of independent period suppressed the system of two republics and the caste regime, allowing indigenous and free color to be citizens of the new sovereign spaces. Although racial prejudice were not erased by laws and constitution, a close analysis of this period reveals that the idea of racial equality was not only mere rhetoric. The proclamation of citizens for all and the elimination of ethnic categories in the census carved out a legal niche that was decisive for the future of the new republics. The struggle for concretely broadening citizenship was carried out in different ways, through party and electoral politics, through armed confrontation and civil war, through negotiation, and through appealing to justice. The advent of modern constitutionalism gave thus the subaltern groups, which were generally marginalized during the colonial period, the possibility to attain new rights. Though the constitutional principles were not automatically enforced, the formal presence of these rights offered important rooms of maneuver that go beyond a simple relationship between the individual and the state, because this space of maneuver involved the process of identification or inclusion and exclusion that were negotiated locally in the social fabric. Obscuring these spaces of flexibility, affirming the simple continuity of colonial practices and institutions, implies to not understand the deep change that took place during the independence period and the role played by subaltern groups in influencing the political decisions. My focus is thus on the occlusion that results from turning the decades following the independence from Iberian metropolis into a critique of colonialism and its legacy that prevented the modern national state to take form. Posing a generic persistence of colonial order gives insufficient weight to the ways in which subaltern people sought to build lives in the niche of post-colonial power, deflecting, appropriating, or reinterpreting the teachings and teaching trusts upon them. The struggle, as clearly shown by the Atenian Revolution, as we heard this morning, and its effect affected the meaning of citizenship or freedom in Europe and the death of nationhood to comprehend what happened in Latin America during and in the aftermath of independence. Indeed, they used the category of national building to evaluate the process of decolonization as completely obscured the strategies used by colonized groups to go beyond the colonial order. The question of citizenship has clearly pointed out the inadequacy of nationhood in envisaging Latin American independence, because as Frederick Cooper has clearly demonstrated, in the Atlantic world, struggle for political voices, rights, and citizenship took place within empire before they became revolution against them, to quote Frederick Cooper. The results of this contest were not national. Membership and allegiance were rather invested in collectives and organizational forms smaller than or traversal to the states, such as the city or other territorial groups. Finally, I want just had a few reflections, one reflection to the Miss Peggy project we talked about this morning. The nationalist narration has obscured, as we heard from Lina, the importance of the continental or hemispheric project. We heard that it was elaborated mainly in the 80s, in the 19th century, and even before 1810, when there was the crisis of the Spanish monarchy. But the causes of its rapid eclipse have not been deeply inquired by historians. Yet, in 19th century Europe, the myth of the old continent, of a long history that united symbolically the different European spaces, had been extremely functional to the emergence of national needs. So, my opinion, a reflection on Latin American decolonization should consider more seriously the continental or the hemispheric force as an alternative way to go beyond the colonial thought. Thank you.
So, these very rich papers, enjoyed very much reading them. I think they there are a number of points of connection. So we'll start in the order which they presented. First, the paper by Francisco Ortega on the conceptual history of Colonia in Spanish, and self-reflection really, the term he uses is stalemate, right? The stalemate in the historiography, on one hand, a kind of maybe an entrenched, although fairly new conceptual history, right? That wants to really be true to the language of the period and is part of the linguistic turn and so on, is very important. On the other hand, historiography that is perhaps a little bit older. It comes along with the colonial question of a political question, engaging in that, engaging in political discourse, public discourse, also engaging in a wider discussion, sort of a third world anti-imperialism, and wanting to keep those two in play, right? And how can we do that in the Latin American field? So this is the other main point. My first question to him really is if he has sort of a specific proposal, not only for how to go beyond that stalemate, but also how to engage theory, because after all, we're completely marginal in discussions of decolonization, even when you take into account, I think, decolonial theory. That is, how can actually you get past that stalemate in a way that's productive, in a larger fashion, right? Not just in terms of our own discussion. So that would be the first question, which I think would be of interest to Forum. Second is what's inherent in the conceptual history sort of project is a recognition. This really is an old historicist idea, and so on, and it's that our own historical understanding is always limited by horizons, conceptual horizons. So, how do we build in a sort of a modesty into historical theory, right, as part of our practice, right? That is, that we're no longer the tribunal of history as Europe presented itself, although it looks like we are here. Right? But instead, we're not really sure about, we're self-conscious of our own conceptual horizon. Right? And what does that mean for theory? Okay, so that's the other question. It's related, obviously, to the first. Third, a little bit more specific, is that while you talk about the conceptual history of Colonia, there's another term, of course, which becomes very powerful at that moment, but which is really only used, at least from what I can see, by Spanish-American patriots, and that's coloniaje. Right? So coloniaje really becomes it's a real cutting-edge term. Right? Now, coloniaje in Spanish has resonance with tutelaje, a whole series of terms, which is that coloniaje is this kind of, this is an imperial discourse which turns you into an infantile subject, right? And it was talked about in that fashion, that is, to be a subject of coloniaje is to be the suppressed subject, right? That is not sovereign. This is the concept that's used all over the place in the 19th century. Particularly in Peru, the colonial past is always talked about as coloniaje. Okay, and that really is a key concept. It's the sharp side of Colonia. So if you could talk a little bit more about that, I think it would be interesting. And so I think coloniaje suggests that there's my take on this is that there's actually a battle going on between Colonia and coloniaje. And that there's a sort of semantic field which also brings into play sovereignty, and right, then becomes the other sort of third element of that thing. And the last point, the fourth point, is if we think about this period, I think, as you beautifully put it, this is the moment in which the new concept of colonialism comes into existence, and so to deny this is really stupid. For post-colonial theory, this really has to be its origins, at least chronologically, right? Even if later it's denied, so we need to look at it. But what does that mean, sort of larger? Because we already have this model, for example, in Pagden, right? Old colonialism, new colonialism, right? In the 18th century is the moment in which the shift happens from these sort of universal empires, right, to ones that are more nationally inflected, right? And which are more, certainly the Bourbon moment crystallizes that. And, is there something else that we're thinking about there that would give us a bigger master narrative, sort of world history, right, between the old colonialism and colonialism? And one thing that I was thinking about was, Spain, the way they say their history is, guerra de independencia, the Spanish war against the French occupation is a war of independence, right? So all of a sudden, Spain is fighting an anti-colonial war against France. And then, of course, a few years later, France, right? So this is a really interesting moment. That is the first anti-colonial war in Europe, sort of a reflex of the Spanish-American coloniaje discourse. Right? I don't know. It seems to me there could be something happening there. That we need to look at the connections in Spain, particularly, not just Italy. I think Italy's particularly later. There's this early moment in Spain where we can see anti-colonial discourse working in Europe, I think. And there must be repercussions in France. There has to be, because stuff is going on against Napoleon, right? But this against Napoleon by I mean, Napoleon is not like uncontested, obviously, in France, right? So there's stuff to look at there. Okay, so those are my 4 points for Francisco for Marcos. And then the first, the question about, you opened talking about the sort of Hegelian narrative, right, which has been critiqued, Susan Moore's and so on, about, which sort of removes Haiti, right, from the master narrative of modernity associated with Hegel and perhaps a large sort of German historicism. But I wonder if the same effect isn't actually at the root of the reason why Latin America is not in the decolonization narrative. Why? Because, of course, Haiti is the example of decolonization and revolution that failed, let's say, right? At large, right? But why isn't France the model of that? The French Revolution failed, okay? Why isn't France the model of the failed revolution? And why is Haiti that, right? And is that part of the reason why we can't think about decolonization having its origins in place like Haiti? That it's a larger narrative, because after all, the decolonization narrative is kind of a Hegelian narrative of liberation, let's say, right? In its, its current sort of historicist default mode, but I think we're offering a different kind of way of narrating decolonization. Second point, the main part of the argument is fear, right? That is, that fear is what's essentially keeping monarchy in place in Brazil, right? Although, of course, now it's a Brazilian empire, or Brazilian-based Portuguese empire, if you will. But, this is precisely the argument that John Lynch and Benedict Anderson used for independence in the Spanish Republic. So what gives, right? I mean, if in one place fear is what drives the revolutions of independence, why is it in the other case that fear drives no revolutions of independence? Something has to be going on there. Maybe, there's other things to be explained, about I mean, there were projects to bring, Ferdinand to Mexico. It didn't work, right? There were projects to install monarchs in Peru. They didn't work. We put a lot of emphasis on republicanism as being sort of, I think, here, the origin of this decolonization sort of idea. But it seems to me that it could also happen under monarchy, or there could also be elements of it going on under constitutional monarchy, right, at this period. Why? Because there are discourses floating around that aren't captured by republicanism, aren't controlled by republicanism. They're bigger, right? Or they're operating at different levels. Anti-slavery and anti-fiscal kinds of discourses about community rights and so on, right? Which are older, right? And which come together at a particular moment. So maybe republicanism isn't the only package, right, in which you could have decolonization work. And so that was the other, that was the second point for Marcos. Lina's paper, I think, besides enjoying the things moving around, which I have to do now on my next paper, it's very, it reminds us that when you walk through this diplomatic history, how, surprising somehow it becomes, and absolutely wasn't at the time, right? And so it's a strong reminder of how, particularly the Monroe Doctrine has played out, right? Has disallowed a certain kind of reading. I want to go to three questions for you. You know, the specter of Haiti, right? Again, which is, you know, we have books about this. We know about how it resonates all around the Atlantic world. Although, you know, clearly there are still a lot of things we don't know about that, I think. I think that's the case here as well. You know that it's playing out in the United States, right? It's a particular moment. At the same time, it's playing out in Mexico, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Venezuela, Colombia, right? These other places that you're talking about, but in somewhat different ways, I think. So, the specter, it's not monolithic, right? There's different ways to read it, clearly. So I wanted to tease those out a little bit. But my main question is, did the sort of the fear of another Haiti, you know, and you're thinking another Vietnam, or if we were talking about Salvador, when I was in, you know, out there protesting against the U.S. intervention in Salvador, we were always saying another Vietnam, and so he's saying another Haiti. Is that what killed the Colombian project? That's my question. That is, the fear of another Haiti. Is this what kills the Colombian project? Two, what was the Colombian project really? This Republican dream. Now, you've talked about some of the masterminds here, and I think it's really insightful, this cartographic imagination, right? So this cartographic imagination comes on. But we also know that it's informed by ideas about classical Greece and Rome, right? In the architecture, right? So we have this classical imagination sort of being uploaded into a cartographic platform, almost. You think of it in contemporary terms, talking about a hybrid kind of reconstruction. It's amazing. But I wanted to know more about those classical, right? I think you did well about the cartographic side, the classical influences. We got some work on this, obviously. For example, what role did Masonic ideology play in this? You know, who's Masons, who aren't? I mean, they're all Masons. Right. And of course, what's going on there? You know, is the Colombian project a Masonic conspiracy? Let's put it that way. Third question is, what were some of the practical legacies of the failed Colombian project in Latin America? You mentioned Republican-Democratic Party split. I think that's critical in the U.S. Now playing out in Trump versus Clinton. You know, what about in Latin America? How does this play out? I think it plays out in Colombia, right? In political parties. We can talk about that a little bit more. The last point was about the deeper history, which I know something about, of Americanism. It actually goes, of course, it predates this project in Spanish America. And so I'm wondering if there are any connections there. You know, we know about Creole patriot Americanism. It's around since the middle of the 18th century. And, you know, is that coming into play here as well? Okay. James Sanders' paper. You know, another rich paper, and gives us bits of his book, and I think takes that further towards this question of how Europe was seen and figures into this. And I think you also, there's a lot of material I've seen in Peru, Chile, Argentina, and so on that confirms this and adds other dimensions to it. I particularly like where he says that the sentiment of decolonial and post-colonial critics today would have seemed like the voice of only the most conservative Europhile in 1860s Colombia. It's a powerful point. That is, there's a sense in which decolonial, postcolonial criticism is just ultra-conservative today when seen in the light of the 19th century. And of course, that's exactly what they say about the 19th century. And with, with a little bit of conceptual history, you can see that. I think that's an important thing to bring to bear, right, in discussions about theory. So the first question is, I guess if you could talk a little bit more about why is Mignolo so wrong? Let's just put it bluntly. Okay? And how? How did that happen? And then the second question is a little more, going back to Benedict Anderson. What does this add to, right, his argument that indeed Latin America is the vanguard, right, of nationalism in the world? I mean, we already have that argument. It's already been distributed around the world. It's already well known, apparently. So what does this add to that, to Anderson? The next question is, actually, when I was listening to you, I think you sort of answered. You talk about the execution of Maximilian and the repercussions of that in Europe. But I was in France. I was wondering if you had any examples of what had happened in Spain. Again, trying to connect with this notion that in Spain there's also a war of independence, which has this kind of anti-colonial feeling. And by the way, that anti-colonial, another reason why Spain has a war of independence is because Spain is reestablishing its independence from Europe. It's like Brexit. Right? I mean, Spain was not considered to be part of Europe in the 18th century, neither by the French nor by the Spaniards. The Bourbons were trying to fix that. Right? There was a strong anti-European sentiment in Spain and in the New World, and it was an important element of the critique of Bourbon rule, right, by Creoles. That also plays out on the fringes of Europe. A lot of the fringes of Europe don't want to be European, because European means all this shit, right? Later, somehow everybody wants to be European, right? This is really, well, nobody wants to be European, right? I mean, if we can help it, right? Because all Europe means is, oppression, taxation, armies, right? All these bad things. This is particularly the case, I think, in Spain. And that tradition continues, right, in Spain. Franco, comes back to that, actually, for all kinds of bad reasons, but for reasons that work among the Spanish peasantry. Okay, and so my last question, and I think you sort of raised it at the end there, is it the historical failure, really, of Europe what's at the root of postcolonial and decolonial theory? That is, both postcolonial and decolonial theory sort of posit that the colonial world doesn't measure up to Europe, right? Because Europe is the center of modernity, and colonialism is this project of bringing modernity, right, to the colonized, and that project fails. But what if we turn that around and say, actually, the origins of this are the failure of Europe itself, right? And that the real project of decolonizing theory is really about decolonizing Europe. And I think it's a different project than Chakrabarty's, which is provincializing Europe. Provincializing Europe is really the opposite thing, right? Provincializing Europe is based on this notion that Europe is the home of modernity. But if you don't accept that, then that project doesn't make sense, right? And another project is needed. So I'm wondering if that is something that we could sort of rally around as a key sort of theoretical move, right, to establish a sort of space, right, in which to take forward a project that could have resonance beyond, say, Latin America. Federica's paper, another rich paper with a really fascinating example of Italy, which moving to Europe has made me really aware. It's based on, I was in Sicily recently, like, oh my God, this is exactly like Latin America. And they have the same discourses about the Spanish past, and there are Baroque Spanish churches all over. There are reducciones, right? And then, of course, the Italian Republicanism, right, it resonates so much. Many of the discourses are very, very much like things I'm used to seeing from Mexico and Peru. And so I think this is a really rich way to go to think about how Latin America is obviously there, but it's denied as part of the anti-Hispanic Republican discourse, right? And so the Black legend, once again, doing its dirty work, and it's our job to clean that away and see what we can excavate underneath it. So my first question is, why did that happen? We know when it sort of happens. It happened in the late 19th century, or at least the second half, depending upon where you are, and it coincides with the formation of the Italian nation, too, right? Was that the only way it could have gone, let's say, at that moment? Was anti-Hispanism sort of necessary, right, you could say? And were the consequences of that then a Europhile kind of discourse of modernity, right, which is anti-Hispanic? Are we just sort of condemned to being exposed to that? Or other, as Francisco was saying, future pasts that were there, that we could now recover? Again, to try to open up some new space for getting past that problem, that Black question. The second question is, could you talk more about the nature of these non-national spaces of citizenship, right? Which, I also found in Peru and wrote a book about that, where citizenship is not necessarily connected to the nation. Particularly in political communities that have a deep colonial past. Right? They don't need that. But they can use the discourse of popular sovereignty to actually make claims, right? Which are both using their ancient constitution, right? And this new future opened up by popular sovereignty. And in those spaces, they're able to contest the nation, right? Well even into the 20th century, you can see this happening in the Mexican Revolution. You can see it happening in the 1920s Peru, when socialism reaches out, right, to some of these communities and say, okay, you're the basis of our political process, right? Mariátegui makes this claim. And he's only able to make that claim because these communities have a sense of ancient constitution, right? I mean, there are other Orientalist ideas sort of in the background that Mariátegui has. I mean, Mariátegui thinks that the Incas are Orientals, and so, I mean, he's steeped in Orientalism just as is most Marxists thought at the moment. But he's also aware of this kind of happening, right? And so, if you can talk more about those non-national spaces. One of those, obviously, is the federation of communities idea. And, by the way, that's Rousseau, right? Rousseau, who is adopted as the theorist of the French Revolution, his ideal community is a federation of communities, right? Not a centralized state. That's what happens in France, right? But that was not the vision at all. And we have visions like that in Latin America. Okay. So finally, your point about decolonization maybe working as a better framework for the post-independence period. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what narrative possibilities that opens up, right? For the bigger story of Latin American history, right? Because it's all, the only narrative we have is colonial, modern, empire, nation, right? There are all these books about that. And yeah, those are my comments.
And we have how long?
And we have,
Couple more days?
2 minutes.
5 minutes and responses, and then we'll open it up.
Each one of those, okay.
It's only 20 minutes left.
So this will make it a couple of minutes.
Even 25 minutes after.
Well, let's see if I can start by, I'm going to start with the last two, and I'll move on to quickly into the first two questions. So the first one that I will be answering is one of colonial, in which I take it to say, enrich that history a little bit more, so we can know, especially after the independence period, what happened there. And I want to say a couple things before going on to addressing that point. The first one is when you take a concept like this, and especially the way that it's used in different contexts. And one of the things that happens is that it begins to develop connections with other concepts, and especially within a certain language. So one of the things that you see with Colonia is that by the mid-18th century, there are two languages that really play an important role in the changing of its semantics and the way in which we use it. One of them, both are native languages, are fairly new, constitutional languages, and that have to do with autonomy, have to do with the new modes of being autonomy, of being sovereign, so a good definition also of sovereignty. And the second one has to do with political economy, and basically the ways in which a given relationship between two territories can be beneficial or not, and can be instrumentalized to the benefit of one of them. Those two political languages play a very important role in the way in which the concept takes out, becomes just a descriptive word into what we could call it an evaluative word, a word that plays an important role in politics. And I also said that by 1820s, it had already developed two different meanings, one of which was it served to assess the relationship between, say, peninsulars and Americans, and it was used to castigate and replicate the way in which representation had been played out in the Cadiz and other places as well. And the second one had to do with the linkage with the notion of emerging national sovereignty. So at that point, we had kind of what is interesting, and I didn't mention that, and this is an important point, is that after 1830s, I don't see that word, concept of colony. It actually drops on the ground. I don't see it being played out as vitally, as importantly, as rich as it was played out between the 1808 and 1830, more or less. At that point, it becomes a lot less important. One will have to ask the question, why? Well, one of the things that I've come to that kind of answer is national sovereignty, as far as these new republics were concerned, had already been asserted. And there wasn't, except in a few cases, a big fear of an imminent invasion of the invasion. So national sovereignty was not anymore as threatened as it was, certainly, or as unimaginable as it was back in 1818, 1819, 1820. Furthermore, the concept of colonia, when it does happen, and it's used in a non-national sovereign context, it can be applied, and this is connected to your colonial question, to conditions of unfair labor relations, asymmetry between social groups. And that is control. That is really not, the elites are not interested in using that language. It seems to me that they quite understand the implications of pursuing that. It's just not great interest to pursue that language. Furthermore, what you actually see at that point is a transition of, say, Native American communities from being perceived as potential citizens that can, within the realm of 10, 15 years at most, acquire all the skills that they will need to in order to become citizens, active citizens, and this is an optimism that exists at least in the 1820s in the great colonial republics, more or less in Ecuador, but certainly more in other places, that this, for instance, Native Americans could acquire those skills. By the 1840s, 50s, 60s, certainly, that optimism has absolutely faded. And what has emerged instead, in order to define these citizens, is no longer a juridical category of citizenship, but citizenship has been suspended by means of an emerging language that is the language of savagery. And then the whole discourse on civilization becomes absolutely central. In the 1840s, a list in Colonia is so central, it displaces and disables the possibility of conceiving Indians as citizens. By 1886, citizenship is completely disabled, suspended for Indians. So in a century, almost 60 years of citizenship that has been given to them, for most of that part, at least for 30, 40 years, it had been suspended. By the end, it's disallowed. It's not even considered more until much later. So that's one thing. Coloniaje, I have not seen it appear in the 1840s. I've seen it in the 1870s, and it's mostly linked with Indian labor. And you're right, it resonates. So if you have connections and evidence of that appearing anywhere else, it will be so interesting. When I've seen people use the word colonia, coloniaje, that kind of, in non-traditional contexts, it's always, jars. It's not, anyway, so that's the whole thing about. As for the connection with Spain, I will take that and think about it, because just in benefit of it. But just a single thing there, rupture, the coexistence, or rather the breakup of, or the decline of the old colonial system and the emergence of the new colonial system didn't just happen in a matter of a few years or just over. It actually coexisted for a long, long time, emergence and decline. Already Montesquieu in the Spirit of the Laws had already talked about two different colonies, colonial systems that were important, the old and the ancient and the new. And so by 1820s, 1840s, that was becoming evident how that old colonial model, they didn't really work. And so what I'm saying is that there is a constant theorization, a constant thinking through modes of colonialism that were available at the moment. And that's important. Now, you give me two more questions which were quite loaded. The specific proposal as to how to engage theory. And I wanted to say that I entered the paper with three areas of convergence. One of which was kind of a conceptual history, do a more rigorous and more, a less dichotomy, ideas versus social, more things, more linked. That's one area of convergence. That's doing historical work. I also mentioned a second one, which was how conceptual historians have to work with subalterns. That's a methodological approach, right? We do have to learn from what others do, anthropologists and others, to actually explore that conceptual universe. And the third was actually a historiographical level. So that is the problem of how to conceive and how to theorize. That is, in other words, what is it that we can also bring to the table in terms of a conversation about colonial and decolonial modes. And that also then links up with the second question you have, which is the conceptual horizon. Well, okay, the conceptual horizon is also the horizon of theorization. What we can say, not only as expressed in a political context, but we can reflect on and construct theoretical objects for inquiry and furthermore. And in that sense, there is an obvious, I think, and we're talking over the break with Frederick about precisely that last point as to being, I think, one of the most exciting and also most difficult ones, just to bring it down from that kind of abstract level of, okay, well, we have the coexistence of various colonial modes and decolonizing practices. There was a certain conceptualization of the idea of colonial, therefore there was a certain level of theorization that was already being gone into that, a critical way of intervening into that. How does that connect to our needs for theorization and our needs for intervention and political reflection on the legacies of that colonial modes and also on the political histories of the region? I'm not going to answer that question, but I'm going to say that's a big task and it's an important one as well.
Thank you. We'll run a little bit past too. Right. The foot is still being. Okay.
Okay, I will try to answer in the time. In the English too, I will use short answers. And I think the first question is about why Hegel and IT and why we use the slave master narrative to explain this context in Brazil and to explain the movement of black diaspora in the process of independence of that. I think that there are two aspects of this. The first one is more practical because I think it's the first paper that me and Devon and other persons in the University of Brasilia, we read about IT influence in America, in a philosophical and political type. And this article is based in a research that is still going. So now with this type of student, but more, we go to other tests like Trilo, Haitian historian, Sibeth Fischer, another researcher, and we're looking if this narrative is compatible with what we are trying to do with this context of ideas. And the second aspect of Hegel and IT in this circumstance is because the hegemonic narrative in Brazil, especially the Gilberto Freire narrative, denied the influence of IT in the Brazilian racial relations, especially in the slavery. So, under the narrative of the Gilberto Freire is a denial about the dialect of slave master narrative in Brazil, just because the relations of the big house in Brazil, especially the relations in the big house. So we thought this Southern narrative is important, or is useful to challenge this hegemonic narrative in a political and philosophical way. And the second one is the fear to keep monarchy in Brazil, while the fear in other contexts is used to democratic and republican principles. This argument is based in Célia Maria de Azevedo, historian from Unicamp in Brazil, that she used the fear to consider how the fear mediate an abolition process in Brazil, maintaining the inequality between whites and blacks, and especially with the immigration problem and other kinds of law, property law, and the punishment laws and this side. So we saw this argument, and we thought this argument can be used to analyze the process of independence to return to the beginning of the 19th century to analyze the process of independence, especially because this methodology tries to demonstrate the influence of the black movement on the Irish ideas, because the hegemonic historicization in Brazil denies this aspect. So, yeah, I think it is that. I don't know if I can answer this in English because it's very complex to your question, but I think that is.
Oh boy. So there's a lot to talk about, and especially in response to your questions, and also in terms of what we've been discussing throughout the whole morning. And so, in order to address your questions, Mark, I think I'm going to focus on the aspect of what was the project of Colonia. And so, what I tried to do in the presentation is to present and project not just the Grand Colombian project, which is itself was short-lived, somewhat known, outside of historiography, not so well known. But in terms of thinking about the Colombian project that also included the United States. And the reason that I wanted to highlight that, especially for the conference today, was to think about the continental similarities that are, at that time, the way historical players at that time saw the potential for connections of a common type of political project, a Republican project against the old world. And so it's one that it's not just Latin America, it's not just Spanish America, but one that clearly included the United States during a very particular moment of re-invasion by the British. And the project, what killed that project, because there's other Colombian projects that were in the works, but what killed that project in part was the specter of Haiti, but in part, but more it's that the threat of the invasion started to dissipate. And part of the reason that the threat of the invasion started to dissipate was kind of through the diplomatic work that went on in the 1920s. And so that Colombian project that had Panama at its center had a manifestation, which of course was the Constitutional Congress of Bolivar, the Panama Congress. And that Congress was super contentious whether or not Haiti was going to be included. And that was also something that was a term of debate in the United States, because if that was going to be the case, there's no way that the US would participate. And so eventually Haiti was not explicitly included, but the question of slavery was behind the question of Haiti, obviously. And because Peru and in Colombia, the idea that there would be free births laws already passed, that itself was enough for the United States to be very fearful of a Colombian project that had these dimensions to it. And so that's what I'll highlight now. We can talk about Masons and our architecture, et cetera, later on.
All right, well, thanks for those rich comments. I'll try to be very quick so we give the audience a chance to ask questions. So just on the Mignolo, whose work I really like and respect, I should say. I think it's just, there's one part that actually I'm very sympathetic to, which comes out of doing the 19th century and focusing on the oppression of popular groups there. And you do worry, I worry my own work and all the great nations information literature that's come out in the last 2 decades, that you're missing some of that basic on the ground, what was it like for a tenant farmer, working on hacienda. And so that older Marxist vision of the 19th century is very valuable. I don't think we should lose that. But one thing I don't agree with him on is I think his argument, not to simplify too much, is that this is not a decolonial moment in America, but because if they're using anything, it's these Western ideas, which aren't appropriate. They're not using the local, natural, indigenous ideas. So they're trapped by that colonial box. But as Jorge pointed out in the Turin peace doors, right, that this using the West in the 19th century, that's completely anachronistic. And this very curious relationship Latin America has with the West. And I think there's been lots of great work showing that these ideas that are casually classified as Western, democracy, rights, citizenship, are developing in places like Haiti, as much as they're developing in France or Britain, or even in the United States. So I think breaking open that category of the West, I think it's critical, both historiographically and politically, since it's mostly used actually for conservative ends these days. So that's a Western idea, don't apply that. Benedict Anderson, obviously massively influential. And I think that also I'm trying to make an argument that Latin America is important, not just for its own history, but for sort of thinking about democracy globally. I'm not really interested in the same questions Anderson was in, which is where the nation comes from, the idea, but I'm more interested in, well, once it's there, how do people use it? How do people employ it, especially in my first book, subaltern groups, how do they use it differently, different popular groups? That to me is more interesting, not that other question is fascinating, it's just that's the one that I work on. And if I'd been allowed, if my editor at Duke had allowed me more words, I would have had a lot more about the independence era in the book, because there's so much exciting stuff being done there. Again by Lena, say, Francisco, Federica Morelli just doing fascinating work there. Everything that's going on there, I sort of take off right after that's over. And so there's just so much interesting work we've done, reevaluating what's going on at that moment. Question of Spain, there's so much anti-Spanish sentiment mid-century still until the rise of Hispanismo, which I argue is actually a very conservative movement. You don't see a lot of it from the Latin American side, except for certain figures like Emilio Castelar, who's famous in Latin America, a friend of the Americas. People write on it like, you're really an American, you're an honorary American, to him, and they see him as part of this Atlantic-wide struggle of republics versus monarchy. So he's definitely seen that way. And to some extent, especially early on, I think he sees himself that way. As his politics become more complicated and he gets closer to power, he pulls back a little bit. But they do this with all kinds of Europeans. Italy as a whole, there's a newspaper that's talking about one of these diatribes this year. It's horrible, and it says like, when we speak of Europe, we don't speak of you, young Italy. You are the America of Europe, And so, they said about the Irish and the Poles and the Hungarians, like, you're Americans like us. And I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you for these interesting questions. And I begin with maybe the easier question of the non-national spaces of citizenship. I think because the independence constitution recognized citizenship to everybody, except for women, minors, and slaves, and so to indigenous and castas too. So it was a wide definition of citizenship, but concretely, the independent states have not the instrument, the census, for example, to impose a list of citizens. So it was the local society that recognized the status of citizens to people. So decision of admitting something to vote or to admitting someone to a public office, for example, or to sign a property contract, were taken by local communities, that is, indigenous communities or neighboring of a city, and it was functioning like that. In this sense, I say that there is no national states that are not imposed by the national or the national states, but that are continue to be defined by the local communities, the society. And so the concept of the decolonization, rather than that of nationhood, allows us to consider these phenomena. These phenomena that were not only limited to the right to vote, but to accede to land property or other rights that citizens had. So, concerning the Spanish sentiment, I don't know if I well understood your question, but emerged in the 19th century. It was not a sentiment that was present. Yes, it was present before it was linked to the Black Legend, but a sentiment, a strong sentiment that lies at the basis of national identity. This was a phenomenon of the 19th century. And it emerged in the north, in the region of Lombardia, rather than the south. If we think at Manzoni, for example, so to explain the backwardness of the south and the meridional questions
And but this intellectual, northern intellectual elite succeeded in separating the anti-Spanish sentiment to Catholicism, because timber-based Catholicism as no, like if you think again in Manzoni, no? Like a sort of modernity to a way out from this backwardness of the Spanish mind. Maybe it's one of the strongest difference with Latin America. The anti-Spanish sentiment was also a conflict, a very strong conflict with against Catholicism, and this was not the same in Italy.
Great, excellent.